I'm Robin. Welcome to my kitchen. Today we're doing a segment of We Are What We Eat. This is my food blog covering things such as food, health, nutrition, and fun. Today we're going to make one of my favorite recipes. It's based upon an old New England recipe for applesauce raisin bread. But sometimes it's easier just to have a muffin. So I've modified the recipe and I've turned it into muffins. So one of the first things we need to do is start getting ready. And one of the most important things to do is to get the butter out. Why am I taking the butter out now? Well, most quick bread and muffin recipes call for you to cream the butter. And this is where you take butter that's at room temperature and you blend it either with a hand mixer or a stand mixer with your sugar. So you say, well, the sugar and the butter, when they cream together, you get lots of little tiny air bubbles in there. And that adds volume to whatever the bread that you're fixing. So it's important to let this sit out for a few hours. How long, you say? Well, depends upon your kitchen and the temperature, but you want to make sure that it's something other than this really hard stuff we've got right now. So I'm going to put this on the counter, and we'll come back in a few hours and we'll get started on the rest. Welcome back. Now that we've got our butter out, the next most important thing that we need to do is to get the oven started warming up. If you just turn the oven on and wait for that ding ding sound that it's up to temperature, that's not enough. We need not only the air in the oven to be the right temperature, we need the oven itself to be up to temperature. So it's very important that when you're ready to get started, one of the very first things you do is to turn your oven on. So I'm going to get my oven started now. I've got mine on a convection setting. If you don't have a convection setting, that's fine. But if you do, you'll want to use that when you're doing things like breads and muffins and a whole host of other things, because that air movement gives you a much more even distribution of heat. Things will brown better. Things will just works better. So we're ready to begin. The butter is nice and soft. Room temperature. We don't want it melted or anything, but we want it nice and soft. So at this point, we're ready to start prepping all of the other stuff. Baking requires preparation ahead of time. And in fact, much of what you do is getting things ready. My flour and other ingredients laid out here so I can start the process of putting together the dry ingredients. You do your dry ingredients, then we'll go through and we'll do the wet ingredients. Now, for muffins, batches that I make, requires 2 cups of flour. I've got 3 types of flour here right now. I have all-purpose flour, which is a good general blend, and it gives a nice texture. I have whole wheat flour, which I happen to like the texture of it, and let's face it, we all need lots of fiber in our diet. I also have buckwheat flour here. Why buckwheat? Well, buckwheat is gluten-free. If you or someone in your family has gluten problems, you'd want to just use this. I like to use a little bit because I like the color it adds, I like the fiber, you get more protein, so I use a combination of the 3. You just want to make sure you've got 2 cups of flour. I also have my baking powder. I use a little bit of baking soda. I've got salt. I know we need to cut down on the amount of salt that we use. However, I only use a half a teaspoon, and you need the salt for the flavor. Stuff just tastes really flat if you don't put some salt in it. I've got nutmeg and cinnamon and all of my ingredients. So I'm going to start measuring out my flour. One of the important things you want to do when you measure your flour is to make sure that you don't get too much or too little. So I'm just going to scoop, shake it a little bit, and level it off. I'm going to use 1 cup of all-purpose flour. Kind of a messy process. Okay, so there's 1 cup of that. Then I'm going to add a half a cup of wheat flour, and then I'll do the same with the buckwheat. Half a cup of that. I know, maybe it's not quite perfectly level, but you can fudge a little bit. One thing you don't want to do is mash the flour down into the measuring cup while you're doing that. That's going to affect the quantity, and you'll wind up with too much flour. Too much flour is going to make your muffins crumbly. Okay, so we got the flour. Add a little bit of salt. I'm using kosher salt here. This salt still has all of the trace minerals in it. It hasn't been overly processed. And trace minerals are very important in the diet. A lot of little things that we need some of. Half a teaspoon of that. My recipe I've got posted up here. I know I could have it on my tablet or something, but since my tablet is neither flour, egg, or waterproof, I'm using the old-fashioned method here. So let's see. Baking powder is 3 teaspoons. Again, you want to not stuff it into the spoon and then just level it off nicely. There you go. And a little bit of baking soda. I got an old jar that I keep some in. Just makes it convenient instead of having that big box. Again, level it off, drop it in. Why am I using both baking powder and baking soda? It gives a little bit extra rise when it's baking, and you get some pre-action. You'll see when I start scooping them out. We'll already have some bubbles forming, and again, makes nice consistency on those muffins when you're eating them. So what else do we need? Oh yeah, cinnamon. Very important, cinnamon. Maybe I go a little overboard on this. I put about a teaspoon in. There we go. And then the last thing is some nutmeg. Now, I've actually got whole nutmegs here. Why? Because these are a lot better doing it this way. Much fresher. They keep a long time when they're in this form. And then you just grind up what you need. I've got a little hand grinder here. Great for all kinds of things. And we're going to wind up with probably about a little over a quarter teaspoon's worth in there. You'll notice, by the way, I'm not putting all of this directly in my bowl. I'm putting it in this. Why? Because I'm going to use this to sift the flour. Make sure there's not any chunks in there. Make sure when I did the nutmeg, I didn't wind up with a piece there that might hurt somebody when they're eating it. And all of those things. So we'll just tap this lightly. Get a little too carried away on this, you're going to wind up with flour all over the kitchen. I've done that. It's just too much cleanup. So we'll just take it easy with this. Knock all of these things down in. There we go. Give this a little rub. There's a few chunky pieces there. We'll just knock those out. And there we go. I know. We'll put that over there. Remember I talked about fiber and why I use whole wheat flour because of the fiber? Well, I'm going to add a little bit more. This is wheat bran. And I'm going to put a teaspoon of wheat bran in. And I'm going to do the same thing with flax meal. This adds not only fiber, but additional protein. This way the muffins are even better for you. Don't worry, they still taste good. Okay, you just need to make sure this is all blended in together. All nice and mixed up in here. There we go. So that's all of our dry ingredients put together. And we'll be ready to move on to the next stage. One of the ingredients in this recipe is sugar. Now, I prefer to use turbinado sugar instead of a plain white sugar. You could use brown sugar, either a light brown or a dark brown sugar, but when sugar cane is processed, the first thing that crystallizes out is turbinado sugar. It has the natural molasses in it. To make light brown or dark brown sugar, they fully process the sugar, removing all of the molasses, and then they put it back in. Well, I prefer to use this. Not only does it have a nice taste, but it's lower on the glycemic index. So if you're concerned about calories, using this, you still get the sweetness, you get the natural molasses, and it's better for you. Unfortunately, turbinado sugar is very granular, so I'm going to have to put it in here and grind it up. I've got a little spice grinder here, and I've got my sugar measured out, and we're going to give it a whirl and powder this stuff. Otherwise, you're going to have crunchy muffins. Got to shake it down. You get a lot of powder floating around. There we go. Nice and smooth. This will work a lot better this way than the other way. Now we're ready to move on to what I call the wet portion of the assembly process. We've done our dry stuff. We've blended our flours. We've got our baking soda, baking powder, salt, cinnamon, nutmeg mixed together. We've taken the sugar and ground that up so it's nice and powdered. I've got my applesauce already measured out and standing by, raisins measured and standing by. My eggs are here. We're ready to put it all together. Remember, one of the key things when you're baking is to get your stuff together. Planning ahead and prepping is very important. So let's get the butter started. So the butter is nice and mushy, but it's not melty. It's important. I'm going to go ahead and cut it. This recipe calls for 1/4 cup of butter. I'm going to just drop that into the stand mixer. Drop the lid and give it a quick blend. Now we're ready to add the sugar. It's very important to let these two cream together for a few minutes. You want to start out slowly. The sugar is very powdered. You crank this thing up to full and you got sugar everywhere. Now another thing that I do is I add some olive oil to this. The olive oil helps with moisture retention, so if you're not going to eat all of your muffins all at once, and you're going to store them and eat them over time, I add about 1 tablespoon of olive oil. I need to get that blended in. I also need to scrape the bowl. Right now everything's kind of a deep tan color, but as it blends together and creams, you're going to see that it's going to lighten up to a very pale white or pale tan color. This is going to take a couple minutes. Okay, this has been going for about 5 minutes now. Let me show you, let me show you the difference this has made. Look how nice and light and creamy that is. So now, we've got the butter and the sugar beautifully creamed together. I'm going to give the bowl just a little scrape here. The next thing to do is to add 2 eggs and my vanilla extract. Now, I'm going to put this on a low setting, and I'm also only going to add 1 egg at a time. I'm going to crack it into a separate bowl. That way if there's a problem or an eggshell, it's not going to cause an issue. And what do you know? I have a little bit of eggshell. What's the easiest way to get eggshell out? Use the eggshell. So we'll add this one. Just pour that in. And I'll crack it. Okay. And of course, those are raw eggs. Very important to wash your hands after handling a raw egg. And increase the speed on this now. This one, unlike the butter, you've really got to keep an eye on. You want it to be fluffy, but you don't want to overbeat it. Oh, and let's not forget to add the vanilla extract. I know, I don't measure it. It's probably about a good teaspoon's worth of vanilla extract. This takes about a minute. What you're going to wind up with is, well, it's going to be a little bit darker now because of the vanilla extract. But again, you want a nice creamy consistency to this. What happens if you overbeat it? Everything kind of separates and looks really ugly in the bowl. So you don't want that to happen. Here, let me show you what this looks like. Scrape that down so it doesn't drip. This is what you're looking for. Okay, we're ready for the final ingredients. We're going to add the flour and the applesauce. We've already got a pretty fair amount of wet mixture in there, so we're going to add about 1/3 of the flour mixture. Again, keeping the beater at a slow speed. We don't want flour all over the kitchen. That's about 5 or 6 scoops. That looks good. You'll also hear that the mixer kind of changes in tone, kind of seems like it's struggling a bit. So we'll add about 1/3 of the applesauce. There we go. some more flour. It's also important to move quickly here. We're not making bread. We don't want to let this over blend because that will get the glutens all wound up in here, and we don't want that. This is a quick bread. Hear how the motor's changing? Time for more applesauce. There we go. Now we'll add the last of the flour. This gets a little tricky. Trick is to get it in the bowl and not all over the counter. And the last of the applesauce. There we go. But wait, you're saying, what about the raisins? Well, yeah, they're next. We got to scrape the bowl first, though. There's a lot of bowl scraping in this process. There we go. You want to make sure all the ingredients are blended, but you don't want to overwork the batter. Seems kind of a contradiction, isn't it? But as long as you move quickly, you'll be fine. Okay. Again, we don't need high speed here. Got the raisins. Oh, the applesauce I'm using is naturally sweetened. Doesn't have any high fructose corn syrup in it. That's important. And the raisins are an organic raisin. Dump those in. Let it blend for a minute. I'm going to do a quick bowl scrape, another quick blend, and we're ready to scoop them into the muffin cups. Okay, that's it. Now for the gooey part of getting all of the stuff off of here. Okay, I've got my handy dandy scooper. This is a good size for my muffin pan. This is just get a scoop and drop it in. Well, not too bad. There we go. And we're ready to put these in the oven. I'm going to set my timer for 9 minutes. No, they're not going to be done cooking then, but I'm going to turn them around. Yes, I know it's on convection, but I still want to make sure that they cook evenly. So I'll rotate them around and set the timer for 8 minutes. Then we'll stab them with a toothpick, see if they're done, and we're ready to put them out on cooling racks. All right, let's see if these guys are ready. Ooh, yum. Don't those look pretty? And my bonus muffin. Stabby with a toothpick. Ah, nice and clean. Now the tricky part is to get these hot things out of the pans and onto the cooling rack. You gotta be fast. Ooh, here we go. Don't want to leave them in there too long. Best to let them dry on a rack. You don't want moisture to form on the bottom. You don't want to dilly-dally when you're getting these things out. Woo! Hot stuff. Alrighty. Here's some from the first batch. Doesn't that look good? Here, would you like one? Okay. A word about my muffins. Yes, I've used turbinado sugar as opposed to regular sugar, so they're a little lower in calories because of that. We've got whole wheat flour plus wheat bran and flax meal in here, so they're higher in fiber. So in some ways you could say these are definitely a healthy muffin, but they're still a tasty muffin, and didn't take a lot of work to do these. A little advanced planning. Remember, preparation makes all the difference in the world. Having those things ready so you can just assemble them and get them into the oven. And what will you have for all that effort? Something yummy and delicious. And if you'd like to learn more about how to make these muffins, I've got a lot of recipes posted on my blog. Please come and visit me It's called We Are What We Eat, Food and Health, and the link for that is at the bottom. Thanks for stopping by. Till next time, here in my kitchen. Bon appetit.